Okay, so you're bringing us right back to the basics. We're going deep, really deep this time.
Yeah, deep dive into Book 3 of Plato's Republic.
Heavy stuff, right?
Yeah,
But we're not going to do like, a stuffy philosophy lecture.
not at all.
This is more like, think of it as like your all-access pass to some of the big ideas about like what makes a society pick.
An ideal society.
An ideal society, yeah. And like how you actually build one. We're talking education, all that good stuff.
The foundations.
Foundations, exactly. We've done the heavy lifting, wrestled with this old text so you don't have to.
That's right.
So we're going to pull out all the juicy bits, the really key insights here.
Exactly. You've given us quite a task with this section of the Republic.
Mm-hmm.
In this deep dive, we really want to unpack the core arguments and concepts, the building blocks that Plato's laying down in Book 3.
Perfect.
Really focusing on how he starts to create this vision of the perfect state.
Mm-hmm.
And with a particular eye on his ideas about education, they're pretty revolutionary. And also the principles, like the underlying principles that he's using for his whole project.
Absolutely. It's all connected. And I think one of the things that struck me right off the bat, one of Plato's initial observations is this: how easily we tend to kind of like blur the lines between the individual and the state.
So true.
It's like we do it now, they did it back then.
Yeah.
Like personal ethics versus like political structures. We treat them as if they're almost the same thing.
Yeah, it's almost like we see them as two sides of the same coin.
Right, exactly.
And what's interesting is Plato's pointing out that having a good person, a good individual, and a good citizen, those actually don't always line up.
Yeah.
It's not an automatic thing. It's
Yeah.
a rare achievement, actually. And for him, it can only really happen in this this perfect state that he's imagining.
Right.
And he's not just saying, oh, good people make a good state. It's deeper than that. He's saying, this ideal person, this perfect citizen, is actually shaped by the state itself.
Okay.
Specifically through education, this really specific kind of education,
Yeah.
rather than just, being controlled by laws.
So it's not just like external rules. It's like this internal.
It's like an inner shaping.
Yeah, an inner shaping and inner fashioning is, I think he uses that word.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of leads us right into how he sees societies actually like starting in the first place. It's kind of a surprisingly practical, needs-based origin story.
Yeah, very down to earth in a way. He starts with, what do humans need?
The basics.
The basics: food, shelter, clothing.
Yeah.
And he argues that it's really tough to get all those things on your own.
Right.
It's much easier to, exchange with other people, to specialize.
Cooperate.
And
Yeah.
that's what brings people together.
Right.
And that act of coming together to trade, to work together, that's the spark that starts the whole state.
It's like the seed of society. And then from those very simple beginnings, you get this division of labor, right?
Right.
He starts with those essentials, the farmer to grow the food,
Yeah.
the builder to make the houses.
Weaver for clothes, the cobbler for shoes.
Yeah. It's like a small village, to get things rolling.
Right.
But then it like explodes outwards.
It does. And that's because Plato recognizes, we're not all good at everything.
Mm-hmm.
People have different talents.
Right.
And it's more efficient if everyone just focuses on one thing. Specializes, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, life doesn't wait for you to become a master of every skill.
Right.
So things get more complex.
And they have to.
You need people for trade.
Mm-hmm.
Not just making things, but moving them around.
Okay.
Wholesale, retail, all that. You need tool makers to support the other craftsmen.
Yeah.
You need shepherds, more farmers, bringing in different goods from other places.
Imports, exports.
Exactly. And that means merchants, ships, marketplaces.
The whole economy.
It really is. And you even need hired labor to make it all run smoothly.
Wow, it's like he's laying out the blueprint for like a functioning civilization.
Almost like a proto-economy.
Yeah, and here's where it gets really interesting, I think. He even suggests that within this structure, within this like framework of, people interacting, trading, working.
That's where justice and injustice start to come up.
Yeah. The very concepts of right and wrong, fairness,
Ethics.
all of that emerges from these interactions, from the structure of society itself.
It's a profound insight.
It really is. So we have the state, we have how it comes about, and then Plato dives into what he thinks is absolutely crucial.
Education.
Education, particularly for the guardians.
The leaders.
The leaders, the people who will like be responsible for guiding this ideal society.
When he's very specific about the type of education they need.
Right. It's this old-fashioned sort of education, he calls it. So break that down for us. What does that actually mean?
Well, it's all about balance, cultivating both the mind and the body. He talks about music, which for him isn't just, singing and instruments.
It's much broader.
Much broader. It includes literature, poetry, stories, the arts.
Okay.
And then there's gymnastic, which is the physical training, the discipline. And he sees these two, music and gymnastic, as totally intertwined.
Two sides of the same coin again.
Exactly.
Okay.
They're both crucial for shaping good character.
And when he talks about music, this is where it gets interesting, right?
Right.
He makes a huge distinction between true literature and false literature.
So philosophically, what's he getting at there? Well, for Plato, true literature has to align with truth.
Okay.
It has to promote virtue. It should give you good examples, show you how to be good.
Okay, so moral stories, basically,
bingo.
but false literature.
That's the stuff that's full of lies, or it makes bad behavior seem okay.
Oh,
And that, for Plato, can really mess you up, especially when you're young.
right.
Because the stories we hear, they shape how we see the world. And this leads him to this rather controversial idea.
Censorship,
Censorship of nursery tales.
which sounds to us very controlling.
It does, doesn't it? But he has a reason.
Okay, lay it on us. What's the thinking there?
He believes young minds are like sponges.
They absorb everything.
Everything. And if those stories are full of, lies or bad behavior, that's what they learn.
So it's like you guys start them off right.
Exactly. You want them to learn virtue and truth right from the beginning.
It makes sense.
Avoid having to unlearn bad stuff later. And he's not afraid to call out the big names.
Oh, no. Who does he target?
Homer, Hesiod, the giants of Greek mythology and literature.
Oh, wow.
He accuses them of spreading bad lies.
Strong words.
He's not holding back.
What are some of the specific stories that he finds so bad?
Well, he really goes after their stories about the gods.
Okay.
Like how Uranus treated his kids, and then what Saturn did to his own father.
Oh, yeah. Those are pretty messed up.
Exactly. He sees those stories as both false and morally wrong.
He thinks they give you a really warped view of, power and family.
Right.
He says those tales shouldn't even be told to children.
At all.
Or maybe only in a very specific, mystical context.
Okay.
But definitely not as casual entertainment for kids.
Right. And it's not just those early god stories, right? He also has a problem with, all the fighting and the drama among the Olympian gods.
Oh, yeah. He finds that really troubling. Zeus fighting his father.
Well, yeah.
All the bickering and backstabbing.
Their love affairs.
Oh, yeah. The love affairs. It's like he's holding these, foundational myths to a really high ethical standard.
Like they should be setting a better example.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He worries that if kids hear all these stories about gods being, unjust or deceitful or violent, they might start to think that's okay, or even that it's divinely approved.
I never thought of it that way.
It's an interesting point, isn't it?
Mm.
And while he does say that maybe there are deeper meanings in these myths, like allegories,
Okay.
he doesn't think kids can grasp that stuff. They're just going to take it at face value.
Exactly. They'll just see the surface story, which is often pretty problematic.
Right. And it's not just the actions, it's the way the gods are portrayed, right? Their flaws, their jealousies, their vengefulness.
Right.
Plato wants the guardians to have this much more idealized, more virtuous image of the divine.
He does.
It's about setting the right kind of example.
Exactly. He thinks the stories should encourage good qualities, justice, temperance, all of that.
Okay.
Not gods who break those rules all the time. He even goes so far as to say that, lawmakers.
The people in charge of the state.
Yeah, they should have the power to decide which stories are okay and which ones aren't.
So state-sanctioned storytelling, that's a pretty radical idea.
It is. It's a far cry from our ideas about, freedom of speech and artistic expression.
Yeah, it is. And he doesn't stop there. He even digs into the nature of truth and falsehood themselves and how each one should be used in this ideal state.
Right. For Plato, truth is the highest value.
Especially for the gods.
Especially for the gods, yeah.
They're perfect. They don't need to lie.
Exactly.
But for humans, it's a little trickier.
He does admit that lies might sometimes be necessary, but only as a very specific kind of tool.
Like a medicine for the state.
A medicine, yeah, and only the rulers should be using it.
Like, in very rare cases, for the good of everyone.
Exactly. But ordinary people should never lie to their leaders.
Okay.
He compares it to a patient and a doctor, or a sailor and the captain of the ship.
Right. You need that trust.
You need trust. You need honest communication.
For everyone to be safe, for the whole thing to work.
That's the idea.
Okay. And this focus on honesty, on truthfulness, it links right back to that virtue of temperance.
Right.
Which for Plato isn't just about, not overdoing it.
No.
It's about self-control and, really importantly, obedience to authority. To the right kind of authority.
Right. The legitimate authority.
Legitimate, that's the word. And he uses Homer again here.
He loves his Homer.
He does. But in this case, to show the difference between like disciplined behavior and, people giving in to their baser instincts.
Right.
So you have like the Achaeans marching in silence with respect.
All orderly and disciplined.
And then you have the guys who are drunk and out of control giving into their desires.
And he thinks those latter examples are really bad for young people.
Because they're not going to learn self-control from that.
Exactly.
And he criticizes other stuff in Homer too, right?
Yeah, all the emphasis on eating and drinking, feasting.
Indulging.
And then the fear of death, the fear of starvation.
Like those are base instincts that shouldn't be encouraged.
Not for the Guardians.
Not for the Guardians. And
No.
also, all those scandalous stories about the gods and their love affairs.
Yeah, he thinks that stuff's got to go.
It's like nothing in those old heroic epics is safe from Plato's critique.
He's really going through it with a fine-tooth comb.
He is. Even small details, like lines about accepting gifts or, toughing it out, enduring suffering, he questions everything.
He does, like that line, gifts persuade the gods, gifts reverend kings.
Yeah, bribery.
He sees that as just like fundamentally corrupt. And then there's the advice that characters give, like Phoenix to Achilles.
Yeah, not always the best advice, very noble. And then Achilles himself, being kind of a jerk.
Taking those gifts, being mean to people, being cruel to Hector's body, and treating prisoners.
Right.
He even says, Achilles was a student of Chiron, this wise centaur. How could he be so messed up?
Yeah, interesting question.
And then there are those, let's call them romantic exploits.
Of the hero.
Of the heroes, yeah, like Pirithous and Theseus.
Not exactly role models.
No, not exactly.
So Plato basically says either these sons of gods weren't really divine.
Or the poets got it all wrong.
Yeah. It's like a complete overhaul of the traditional stories, the cultural heritage.
All to shape the perfect guardians.
Right. And this censorship, it's not just for stories and poems.
No, it goes further.
It extends to all art, right?
To other artists too, yeah. Sculptors, painters.
Okay.
They also have to follow the rules, depict what's good, what's beautiful.
Keep it simple.
Keep it simple. No ugliness, no weird proportions, nothing that could, corrupt people's souls.
So it's like he wants to create this environment where the young guardians are always surrounded by
beauty, harmony.
Yeah, absorbing good influences from everything.
It's about creating the ideal atmosphere for their development.
Makes sense.
Oh.
And then there's music in the narrower sense, melodies, rhythms, all that.
Right.
He gives that a really important role too.
Oh, absolutely. He thinks music can reach deep into your soul.
And shape it.
Yeah.
In a way that like other things can't.
He thinks it can give you this sense of beauty of what's right and wrong without you even realizing it.
Subconsciously.
Yeah, subconsciously.
Okay.
And he believes that hearing harmonious music, good rhythms,
sets you up to appreciate reason later on. So it's like preparation.
It's like learning the alphabet before you can read.
Right.
Or seeing reflections before you understand the real object.
That's a good analogy.
So you're training your soul to recognize harmony.
It's almost like there's this music of the soul that needs to be in tune with, like, the harmony of the universe.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
And he also says that a healthy body with a good mind, that's the ultimate beauty.
Yeah, he really emphasizes the inner state.
He even says, like, you can forgive physical imperfections.
But not imperfections of the soul.
Wow, okay.
And he defines true love as this thing that comes from temperance and reason.
Not just like physical attraction.
Not just lust, no. It's a higher kind of connection.
A harmony of minds.
Exactly. And then he moves on to gymnastics.
The physical side of things.
Right. And he makes this really interesting point about the soul being the cause and the body being the effect.
Explain that one.
He's saying that if you educate the mind first through music,
Mm-hmm.
then the body will naturally follow.
Oh, interesting. So the well-ordered soul will lead to a well-ordered body.
That's the idea. And because of that, he thinks you only need a general outline for physical training.
Okay. But there's still some specifics, right?
Oh, yeah. For example, he says guardians shouldn't drink alcohol.
No strong drink.
It clouds the mind, weakens the body.
Right.
Not good for people who need to be sharp and in control.
Makes sense. And he also questions whether those traditional training methods, like in the palestra,
You know, where they wrestled and boxed.
yeah, he questions whether that's really the best way to train warriors.
Especially warriors who need to be alert, adaptable, and resilient.
Able to handle changes in food and climate.
Exactly.
So what does he propose instead?
Well, he wants a simpler form of training.
Okay.
More rigorous, mirroring that simplicity he's so keen on in music.
Okay, I'm seeing a pattern here.
And he even outlines a specific diet for the guardians.
No more feasting.
No more feasting.
What do they get to eat?
Mostly roast meat, actually.
Roast meat.
He barely even mentions fish, which is interesting, considering they're by the sea.
Yeah, that is interesting.
And no fancy sauces, no sweets, no elaborate dishes.
Really stripping it back to the essentials?
Exactly. He specifically says no to Sicilian cookery, Athenian sweets, Corinthian courtesans.
Whoa, hold on. What do courtesans have to do with food?
He's making a connection.
Okay.
He sees those things, the food, the courtesans, as being like the Lydian and Ionian modes in music.
Okay.
Too soft, too indulgent, weakening to the soul.
Interesting. So it's all about this idea of simplicity, austerity, avoiding excess.
In both mind and body.
Mhm.
And he even connects this to things like, having too many doctors and lawyers in society.
Okay, how does that fit in?
He sees that as a sign that people aren't in control of themselves.
They're not temperate.
Exactly. They need all these external interventions, whether it's medicine or law.
Instead of just, living healthy and justly in the first place.
Right.
And he criticizes people who, take pride in navigating complex legal systems.
Instead of just living justly from the start.
It's like, why make it so complicated?
Exactly.
And he uses Asclepius, the famous healer, to illustrate his point about medicine,
Mm-hmm.
contrasting the simple remedies you see in Homer.
You know, like that scene where they give Eurypylus a posset of Pramnian wine?
Yeah, pretty straightforward.
Straightforward, no blame, no fuss, just, here, drink this.
But in Plato's time, things were different.
Much more complicated.
He mentions people like Herodotus,
who came up with these elaborate treatments, these long, drawn-out processes.
and Plato's not a fan,
He thinks they were basically torturing people.
prolonging sickness instead of curing it.
Exactly. And he suggests that Asclepius, the ideal doctor, he had a much more decisive approach.
Kill or cure.
Yeah, kill or cure, especially for, working people who couldn't afford to be sick for months.
They didn't have time for that.
They didn't have time. It's almost like he's saying there were different standards of care for different classes.
Interesting. And he even questions that, saying, the one attributed to facilities.
The one that says, when a man becomes rich, he should practice virtue.
Yeah, he's skeptical
He thinks all that focus on health and comfort, it can actually distract you from virtue.
because you're too busy taking care of your body.
Exactly.
And he concludes that Asclepius and his sons, they probably didn't practice that kind of, indulgent medicine.
They didn't want to keep useless people alive.
Harsh.
They wanted a strong society.
Okay.
So they focused on genuinely curing people who were, living right,
The temperate ones.
the temperate ones, but they wouldn't treat people who were sick because of their own bad choices.
They were like, that's on you.
Pretty much. And he even dismisses that story about Asclepius being killed for bringing a rich man back to life.
The one by Pindar.
Yeah, he thinks it's a lie,
So a very specific view of health and medicine.
and a pretty controversial one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then as book 3 wraps up, we get this brief mention of justice. How does that tie into everything else he's been talking about?
Well, it's kind of a sneak peek at something he'll explore more later on.
Okay.
He hints at this idea that justice in society is connected to the division of labor.
Every man doing his own business.
Exactly, fulfilling their role.
Okay.
And he uses this analogy of, reading big letters before small letters.
The big letters being the state, the small letters being the individual.
Right. So understanding justice on the big scale in the state will help you understand it on the small scale in yourself.
It's all connected.
It is.
So let's sum it all up. In this deep dive into book 3, we've seen Plato lay out the groundwork for his perfect state.
His ideal republic.
His ideal republic, right. He starts by showing us how intertwined the individual and the state really are,
Mm-hmm.
saying that a truly good society depends on having virtuous individuals.
Shaped by the right kind of education.
Shaped by the right kind of education, exactly. And we looked at his ideas about how societies begin.
From those basic needs, food, shelter, clothing.
The basics.
And then the division of labor that grows out of that.
And then we went deep into his vision for education, especially for those guardians.
The future leaders.
Right, the future leaders.
Mm.
He emphasizes the power of music, which, remember, includes all those stories, poems, art, and also the importance of physical training, gymnastic.
And all of it guided by this pretty strict approach to censorship.
Yeah, he's not messing around.
He's serious about shaping those young minds.
Absolutely. And I think all of this, everything in Book 3, it's really setting the stage.
It is.
He's defining the principles, the kind of people, the citizens, who will be essential for building and maintaining his ideal republic.
It's the foundation.
The foundation. So for you listening out there, here's something to ponder, even after our deep dive is over. How do Plato's ideas about education, about the roles we play in society, how do they resonate with you today?
Do they feel relevant, outdated, dangerous?
Yeah. Are there things in our own culture, stories, movies, music, whatever?
Modern-day nursery tales.
Yeah, that maybe deserve that same level of critical scrutiny, even if we might not agree with, Plato's methods.
That censorship piece is definitely debatable.
Definitely debatable. And how do we, in our own complicated world, how do we balance the needs of the individual with the needs of the whole society?
It's a question that's still relevant even thousands of years later.
It is. It's a big one. And we encourage you to, think about it, explore it, maybe even go back and read the Republic yourself.
We hope this deep dive has given you a better understanding of what Plato's trying to do in Book 3.
Absolutely.
It's complex, but it's fascinating.
It is. Thanks for joining us on this philosophical journey.
Until next time.
Keep those brains buzzing.